Well, while I was working for the Navy, I actually served on city council in Virginia Beach. I did both simultaneously. That's doesn't leave much for personal activities, I will add. But just love of community. I came from a family of public service. I think if you don't like what you see or like what you do see, you want to make one go away and you want to make the other one more of, right?
Yeah.
So if you don't get involved and you don't participate, you don't get a dividend. So I wanted to make my contribution to make the city a better place.
Hey everyone, welcome to the Discover Virginia podcast. I'm Joseph Trahan, your host for the #1 video podcast in Virginia, where we explore the rich history, vibrant culture, and iconic businesses that make our Commonwealth truly special and worth talking about. So get ready as together we discover Virginia. Welcome back to a special bonus episode of Discover Virginia. Today, we're going to shift gears and dive into the important conversation about the future of our community. As the local election approaches here in the Virginia Beach area, we have the opportunity to speak with a few individuals who are vying for leadership roles in our city, both for the run at being the next mayor of Virginia Beach and as for the role of council members here in the city. In this episode, we'll directly hear from each candidate about their visions for preserving the legacy of Virginia Beach, building the next generation of leaders, and the values that drive them. We'll also dive deep into the policies, agendas, and community projects they're most passionate about pursuing if elected. Before we begin, it's important to note that this is a nonpartisan conversation. Our aim is to provide a platform for open dialogue, free of bias, bashing, or political agendas. No financial compensation has been provided to these candidates, and we are not endorsing any specific individuals. Instead, we're here to give you, the listeners, a chance to hear their genuine thoughts about the vision for our city. A few ground rules. We're keeping it productive. This isn't about comparing the other candidate. It's about what each candidate brings to the table and how they plan to positively shape Virginia Beach. For more information on local elections, be sure to visit vpap.org, the Virginia Public Access Project, which provides valuable, nonpartisan insights in our community's elections. Thank you and enjoy the show. Alrighty, everyone. We have our guest here today, John Moss. John Moss for Mayor.com. John, welcome to the Discover Virginia podcast.
Well, thank you for having me this morning. It's been great to be here.
Absolutely. As you all heard in the intro, we're doing our bonus episode today, talking with some local officials for the upcoming election, specifically here in the Virginia Beach area. And I'm super excited to dive into our conversation and talk more about our community as a young person who has been a complete nerd of all things Virginia Beach the past couple of years with the show. It's great to talk to somebody who has been here as long as you are. So, John, we're excited to have you.
I'm excited to be here, and Virginia Beach is a wonderful place. It's a great place to be excited about.
Absolutely. And just a friendly reminder on ground rules today, for those of you listening, this is a podcast platform, not very much like our other things you might see on TV. So just a friendly reminder, we're going to keep it productive. This isn't about comparing the other candidate per se, but it's what each candidate can bring to the table and how they plan to positively shape Virginia Beach. And for more information on local elections, be sure to visit vpap.org. That's VPAP.org, the Virginia Public Access Project, which provides valuable nonpartisan insight into our community's elections. Sound good, John?
Does sound good. VPAP's a very good site.
Wonderful. Well, I'd like to get the conversation kicked off with who you are as an individual. I know you're a dad, you're a husband, and you've been in Virginia Beach a long time. I'm curious, John, what exactly got you interested from transitioning out of the Navy into then pursuing a life in the public sector?
Well, while I was working for the Navy, I actually served on city council in Virginia Beach. I did both simultaneously. That's doesn't leave much for personal activities, I will add. But just love of community. I came from a family of public service. I think if you don't like what you see or like what you do see, you want to make one go away and you want to make the other one more of, right?
Yeah.
So if you don't get involved and you don't participate, you don't get a dividend. So I wanted to make my contribution to make the city a better place and give the citizens a more active role.
Absolutely. And I know you're an avid Boy Scout as well as your children. They are involved in the Scouts, and that's kind of that principle of, kind of what can I do with my hands and what can I make of myself in the things I've been given, right?
Right. There is no better youth program now for boys and girls, or males and females, than Scouting in terms of value-based leadership development and skill development, which tie knots, save people's lives, start a fire, how to survive when it's wet or cold. but it's character building, and I think that's always what's made America great is people of great character and ethics.
Absolutely. And not to mention, shout out to the Girl Scout cookies. I mean, Boy Scouts are pulling hard with the popcorn, but I gotta default to the cookies. What about you, John?
Me too. I never, wherever I'm at, whatever store it is, I've got now that they have the cube, I got my card out.
It's an easy sell for sure. I'd like to next distinguish what a mayor does and is responsible for versus what it doesn't. We have a Facebook community of over 100,000 locals in and around the Virginia Beach area. And one of the things I asked them was, if you could interview the mayor, what questions would you ask them? We'll cover some of those scrubbed questions a little bit later, but I wanted to ask you, John, just to get the conversation rolling, what does a mayor do? Like, what responsibilities do they have? And then maybe what are some of the topics that people think mayors do and they might assume incorrectly that lead them to maybe leaning one side or the other?
Well, it all starts off with recognizing that Virginia Beach has a city council, city manager form of government. So unlike New York or Chicago, we don't have a strong mayor who is the chief executive like a governor or the president.
Sure.
The city council appoints the city manager, who in effect is the chief operating officer of the city. The council as a whole is the chief executive officer of the city as a body, but each individual council member is like a legislator, like the Senate, has no power, no power to direct anything, except the mayor can declare a holiday. So that's the one executive power that makes him popular probably with a lot of people, or her popular. Yeah. But the mayor has two roles as the mayor. He or she is the ceremonial head of state, kind of think of like a Queen of England or something, head of state, where their job is to market the city, right? To instill citizens' pride in the city. Also to, by the way he conducts the meetings, which is another role, instill trust in government. And also to be the chief spokesman in time of disasters or major incidents. Those are kind of ceremonial head of state roles. The bigger role is the presiding officer of the council as a body.
Sure.
Like think of it like a chairman of a board of directors.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's an important role. So in that role, the mayor with his peers sets the agenda. He also is the person who issues parliamentary rulings. And while that's often not happening, but when it does happen, it's usually on fundamental issues, which are very important.
Sure.
He recognizes who speaks and how long they speak. And he also directs and guides and tries to get a consensus. But when a consensus is not achievable, he has to let the majority will. It may not be the mayor's will, but the will of the majority has to prevail. Decisions have to be made, and you have to take each issue. It's like lawyers in a courtroom. You don't take them personal, right?
Right.
That's the issue. You move on. And then the mayor has the role of being a council member with his own vote or her vote. But at the end, he carries the burden of representing the body's decision, whether it was his or her decision or not. So that's kind of be a little bit difficult at times. And because he's that position is most visible, he has the power of persuasion, because now the mayor is the only position elected by every single citizen. All the other council members are like congressmen, they're district, so they represent and are accountable to their constituency electorally, but only the mayor now is voted on by all the people, and that changes their status in the situation. A lot of people think the mayor does kind of have some like power and can direct things to happen.
Right.
But reality, he does not. No mayor has, like I said, except the holiday, doesn't have any executive direction authority. Now, the mayor has some other authorities that don't come from the person, but position. The mayor, by state law, is the voting member on the Hampton Roads Transportation Accountability Commission, which decides the priority for regional road projects and allocating of funding. So there the mayor has two roles. One, he's trying to advocate for his community, but at the whole, he also has to be looking at a regional look, which is not a role the mayor has sitting on the city council.
Right.
And then he's also the mayor is the chair of the Virginia Beach Community Development Authority, which is the authority that governs the Atlantic Park development
I know that's a fun project as well that you have some opinions on.
I do, but he's the president of that.
Right,
So
absolutely.
that's not a minor role. And then he represents the council as a body on various regional commissions like the Hampton Roads Hampton Roads District Planning Commission. So those are the regional representation, specific statutory roles, presiding officer, and ceremonial. So there are a lot of dimensions. So it really means it's really not a part-time job.
Absolutely. I mean, aside from, television shows, I don't imagine, someone representing the mayor could be able to do a whole lot more than advocating for the citizens. And being in that leadership role is very important. Okay, John, there is this survey you mentioned, and I think it was called Ballotpedia.
Ballotpedia. It's Ballotpedia. Ballotpedia, I believe it is. Ballotpedia.
Thank you for that. And apparently there are some questions on there that get to know the mayor a little bit better. Actually pulled some of questions similar to those that I'd like to ask you next. Kind of some rapid fire. Would that be okay?
Absolutely. I love questions.
So I know we recently started the new football season. I'm curious, what is your favorite football team? We can go college or right.
Well, obviously, I went to Virginia Tech, so I'm a Hokie on the college ground, right?
Yeah.
But I went there before, Beamer ball, so we didn't have such a great team in those early 70s. But nonetheless, and Green Bay Packers. From the day of watching them on my round black and white Philco television back in the days when Paul Hornung and, they were all out there playing in the mud and all black and white, but always been a Green Bay Packers fan.
Love it. What about your favorite beach in Virginia Beach? Because many tourists don't know, and some of our locals might forget, there are more than one Virginia beaches to visit.
I think Little Island Park for two reasons. One, it has good parking.
Yeah.
Very close to the water. They have also facilities for people who need to use the facilities and not the ocean. And so, and bake cooking and places that have barbecues and things of that nature. So I think it's a local beach, and I think it's my favorite.
Great recommendation. Absolutely. When you're not in Virginia Beach, what is your favorite city to visit throughout the Hampton Roads area?
Oh, Hampton Roads, probably Williamsburg.
Williamsburg. Okay. Why is that?
Well, both the architecture I love. I think I like colonial Georgian-styled architecture. And I just like the history, and maybe because one of my older boys went to William and Mary. They always said that Thomas Jefferson may have built UVA, but he went to William and Mary.
Yeah. Gotta love that rivalry there. Which local historical figure do you aspire to be like?
Local
historical figure that you would aspire to be like.
Can I pick two?
You can pick two.
I'd like Patrick Henry.
Okay.
And Thomas Jefferson.
Lovely. Those are great picks. Last one for you, and this one is tongue-in-cheek, a little fun here, but I have to ask because this is the most requested question on the Facebook groups. Are we in our lifetime going to see the Laskin Rd project get finished?
Well, I think we should. Anyone who remembers, as long as I did, how long it took us to build Independence Boulevard, that goes back a ways. That was a long, long project.
Sure.
What I want to give, in all fairness to the city, that is not a city-awarded, city-conducted, supervised, or constructed project. That is the last VDOT, that's the Virginia Department of Transportation, designed, led, and constructed project in Virginia Beach. Henceforth, all projects will be done and managed by the city. But yes, that is taking a long time. It's easy to criticize. They've had their own issues on supplies and acquisitions and a property, but nonetheless, it reminds me of the widening of the interstate on the other side of the tunnel that took to going. Not talking about the 3-lane, I'm talking about just the improvements on the 2-lane, and that was about a decade in the making. It seems like road projects they don't have the way to get those expeditiously done.
Yeah.
But when it's all done, and I remember when the boulevard was the part that was the 8 lanes, the 4 lanes and the feeder lanes, when it was all over, about 2 or 3 years after that, people tend to forget the inconvenience and they enjoyed it. But yes, it has been a struggle, and it's certainly not, I'm sure VDOT is not taking any sense of pride out of how long that has taken.
Absolutely. And because I like to look at the positive aspect, I haven't lived in Virginia Beach too long myself, just since 2018. And I've really enjoyed looking at the history of the city and just how far it's come when it really got, kind of put on the map. I think in the mid 60s, early 70s, you kind of saw this 2-lane dirt road. In a lot of ways, Virginia Beach began to be this resort city, and everything we saw with the I'm gonna mess up her last name. Obendorph.
Myra Obendorph.
Myra
A
Obendorph.
very good friend of mine. I love
Yeah.
Myra. She was wonderful.
Incredible mayor for the city, and really propelling it into the 21st century. And I think addressing where a lot of beach cities haven't gotten there yet. Sorry, North Carolina, I'm gonna call you out. But these beach cities that are resorts, that they have the one life. They're resort city.
That's because they don't have all those naval facilities.
This is also
Oceana
true.
Dam Neck.
Yeah.
Fort Story. The Navy really gets a lot of credit
Absolutely.
for the quality of life in Virginia Beach. The people that retire active, the civilians they brought a lot, and a lot of the buildups happened during defense buildups in Hampton Roads. Not surprisingly, resulted in big buildups and developments in Virginia Beach. So it's been a good partnership.
Absolutely.
And explains a lot why we're not the Myrtle Beach.
Right. Yeah. Well, yeah. There's this second life Virginia Beach has after resorts, where a lot of places might not even close down, but they kind of take on this new life. And John, I appreciate you mentioning that. Shout out to our next series. We're doing a veterans series.
Oh, great.
For veterans turned business owners during the month of November, celebrating Veterans Day and everything like that. So if you're enjoying this type of content, continue to follow along. We'd love to shout out some local business owners then.
Whenever you see, and I participate in soccer, scouting, or whatever,
Yeah.
you're going to find active duty military personnel and civilians volunteering, because that is the culture.
Yeah.
Is to be involved in the community where you serve.
Absolutely. So, John, I would like to steer the conversation next to some agendas, and we're going to be covering the meat and potatoes of what you have running for mayor and what you believe are going to be the most important things to address, first and foremost, if you are elected. I'm just going to read this out. These are popular, at least popular to me. And I agree that they should be tackled. So the first is going to be tax relief, making city government more affordable. Second is going to be public safety, increasing the number of patrol officers to enable more patrol zones per precinct. Improving educational outcomes, so more emphasis on non-college bound career paths. Number 4 out of 5, we have enable private sector job growth, so stop special interest subsidies. And then 5, investment in neighborhoods, road maintenance, flood prevention, etc. So these are your main issues. These are your main topics, I'll say, that you're going to be covering. And just a friendly reminder to our listeners, this is a nonpartisan. This is what every city, I believe, especially on the East Coast with growing populations, with popularity of tourists, and also with just the responsibility we have as community members to hold each other accountable, should be covering conversations like these. So, John, to get things kicked off, if elected, what would your first 90 days, the first 90 days in office look like?
Well, prior to that, if I was successful,
Yes.
between that and January 1st, taking
Right.
office, I would be making those typical 15-minute office calls, as we used to call them in the Navy, visiting the various naval bases, COs, visiting the major top 10 corporations that we list in our bond prospectus.
Sure.
Reaching out to those various groups that may or may not have supported me, because in the end, when you govern, you support everyone. So
Right.
you got to listen to everyone and find common ground. So that's what I would be doing over that November 8th when they certify the results to January 1st. So that you, and also more importantly, speaking with the peers that you will be working with, because
Sure.
it is a group of 11. Everybody there's got to have an ego. Everybody there has their own agenda, like in Congress. But you got to find out what those issues I just mentioned there, where that common ground is. So that first 90 days, hopefully, I would have had some preparatory work. I would like to hope I could get my colleagues to agree to a different way that we conduct our business. I don't want to get too far ahead of that because you're getting ahead of yourself. But I've given some thought. Does the process that we used for when everybody was all elected, and when issues and resources were more plentiful,
Sure.
the right process to deal with much more constrained resource environments and a district system, I think we need to adapt to the process And I'll just give you one example, if I
Absolutely,
could, just so people
yes.
can look. Today, when there's something going on in a district person usually makes the motion, whatever that is, for rezoning. And like Silo on the Greens at Southern Pines, they would make that recommendation. They'd have to get a second. Then often when that's not where the majority is thinking, what happens? You get a substitute, so their motion never gets voted on. I think it would create more bonding and cooperation if we changed our business rules so that the district member didn't need a second and they were entitled to a vote, an up or down vote. And if it doesn't pass, which can be, it's okay, that's fine, then another motion's entertained. But if that's the district member who those people have elected from that district for their consent to advocate for what they think is best for them, that the courtesy and the presumption that that district member is speaking for them, that district member is, and the people in the district, more importantly, he or she's a proxy, deserves an up or down vote on what they thought was in their best interest for their district. I think that would go a long way to making people feel that their voice was heard and they got a vote.
Sure.
That's another example, if I could, is the budget process. I think it could be moved to the left another 30 days, get it earlier, have more public participation, and then the council makes a recommendation to the public, and that's what gets heard about, not so much the managers. And instead of doing reconciliation at the end where they meet one-on-one to avoid the FOIA Act and all those things, Freedom of Information Act requirements, to just be like in Congress. Have a meeting where people put their issues on the table and each amendment gets voted on.
Yeah.
So that there's more transparency and people don't think that, well, once the budget's done, and the public hearing is over,
Right.
then they all get together and decide what the budget is. So I think there are some things we can do to change the public's trust, which I think is not there where it should be. And that's the political capital you need to make these tougher decisions we're going to talk about. So that's part of that 90 days is increasing the trend. I want to make my calendar public so everyone can see who I meet with, just like they do at the White House. Everybody knows who meets with the president. It's public.
Yeah.
So I think that first 90 days is about changing the tone and the transparency and the openness that it really is the people's council. It's not ours. We're just elected with their consent. I want to change people's attitude about how council operates and how it looks in the appearance. It may not change decisions, but that people are more see the inside and there's more transparency, and none of these meeting 2 by 2. You want to come talk to me as a mayor? That's great. But there's going to be a summary of who I met with and what was discussed.
Sure.
And that doesn't happen today. And I think that makes people think, what's going on behind the curtain? So like on The Wizard of Oz, I want to pull back the curtain so people can see what's really happening and they can have more confidence that they can trust that the government is acting in their best interest. They may not agree with the answer, but they'll know that they could see how the answer was made.
Sure, absolutely. And as we all know, the mayor is somewhat of a limited position, as you mentioned before, and I'll say there is a term limit, but there's not a number of terms you can run for. Is that correct?
It's a 4-year term, and there is no limit, unlike the governor can only run one and done.
Yeah.
I think there's something to be said for the one and done for the governor. They have more power because of that, and one of the more powerful governors in the country is the governor of Virginia.
Sure.
But you're also motivated not to sit back. You are motivated to what? Get stuff done.
Get it done. Get it done.
And focus
Absolutely.
on what you think's most important.
Yeah. So, John, if you just had those 4 years, of those items we listed before, those 5 items, which ones feel most obtainable given the current makeup and climate that our city is in?
Getting the government more affordable is probably the most achievable in that first year, only because what do we know? 80% plus of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. Small businesses are struggling. 40% of small businesses are even behind on their rent. This is a national statistic, so these aren't, Virginia Beach specific.
Sure.
But there isn't any spare cash. And this is a national issue. It's not unique to Virginia Beach. Virginia Beach is more fortunate than some of our neighboring cities. But the days of big growth of revenue are kind of like in the rearview mirror, and now it's making the better choices and make every dollar count. So I think that that's where You know, you can't have say, I want all the public safety, I want all this stuff. You're going to have to make some choices.
Right.
And we needed to follow the governor's lead. He did a great job. What did he do with budget surpluses? He kept quite a bit of it and invested in mental health and education and public safety, right? He did all those things, but he gave money back.
Sure.
2 tranches. And he doubled the standard joint and individual income tax deduction that has various dollar values for various people. And he eliminated the state sales tax on food. So are we going to be able to just give back, everyone's going to get a $1,000 check like in Alaska off oil? No. But you got to show empathy that you understand that struggle. So can we give maybe $100 a month back to people?
Sure.
Possibly. We got to set a goal rather than thinking there's all the city requirements, what the city needs as an entity, and say, what do people need to see? And they need to see some kind of dividend from all the investments that we've made. So I think one of the things you do is you don't budget for people you're never going to pay, which is what we do. Between the city and schools, that's probably $35-40 million. So I think there's some, but once that low-hanging fruit's gone, you know, now it's the hard work of getting productivity, and in some cases telling people, hey, if you want these things, because we really have leaned out, I'm willing to make the case, open book management, we've done what you've done at home. We've cut the equivalent of cut the cable, you know, the subscriptions, you know, all the things that we've done. We're using the coupons, we're getting the federal grants.
Right.
We've leaned it out. So if you want something more, then are we willing as a community to pay more? Because I really don't have another place to go. And I think that process that we have to get to has to get that confidence, which is what we did with the $567.5 million bond referendum for stormwater, the largest referendum ever in the city, the largest one for stormwater in the state, and it was approved by 72% of the public. And I was very proud of the role I played in constructing that bond referendum and going out and, I won't say selling it, but explaining to the public the choice.
Right.
We either do this or this is the risk that you're assuming. Your choice. It's your money. It's your taxes. And I think when you do that and lay it out there and done your homework and engage people, I think average citizen's pretty smart. Matter of fact, very smart. And they're managing those budgets on that below median salary income. They're the geniuses, really, if they're making their life work. And they gave us permission to do that, and we're going to benefit as a community. So I think that's a good example of how to move ahead.
Absolutely. John, thank you for sharing your perspective on that. Of the list you mentioned, you just explained which one you feel would be most obtainable if you were limited to only 4 years. Which one of those do you feel is least obtainable with the current structure in place and the goals and agendas that you have?
With the current makeup, which could change on November 5th.
Sure.
Probably changing the attitude of not doing these money-losing, low-priority, low-wage job, public-private partnerships.
Please elaborate.
And I'm going to elaborate.
Yes.
For example, Atlantic Park, which a big expose has come out on Bacon's Rebellion, done by Captain James Sherlock.
Okay.
I think it's a series. It just first chapter came out yesterday. And he has spent yeoman's work 4 or 5 months in going into the details. But Atlantic Park principally is a wave pool, retail, apartments, and a music hall. That's its principal thing. None of those are high-wage jobs or in any of those things. So we have put in $153 million of public debt borrowing capacity. That's capacity that we can't use for schools or roads or whatever because we've dedicated it to this, right? Mm-hmm. And the private investment is only $157 million. That's not exactly a very good ratio for such a big commitment.
Yeah. And
the city manager in his own report, this Mr. Patrick Dehaney, in a report to City Council on page 30, it just shows you how closely I've read that it won't show the first dollar to the unrestricted general fund that pays for police, pays for teachers, all the things that we use every day, no sooner than 7.5 years after it opens, which would be 2032. So why did we tie up $153 million of public debt? This is not exactly a Warren Buffett qualifying project. To that, these are bad deals. And I'll have another one. We
Sure.
spent $26 million to build a road for a $1.3 trillion, that's T, trillion-dollar company to build a warehouse where most of the jobs are the drivers making less than $20 an hour and most everything inside is automated. How long does it take to get a return on the investment from the property tax on that facility to get back $26 million? When I was on council initially, that deal was only a $6 million. It grew by $20 million. Why? Now, I'm going to give you an example of a good one because everything, there's good stories too. So it's a balance. It isn't all global technology systems.
Right.
People may be familiar with the old signature 9-hole executive golf course that was on Bird Neck Road, right? South Bird Neck Road to be specific.
Okay.
Well, that company comes in. They got an $8 million incentive from the city for jobs that pay over $75,000 a year. Now, that's the investment you want to make, not $26 million for the $18 an hour job with no benefits for people driving trucks that aren't even employees of Amazon.
Sure.
So there's or at people doing retail. Not all those jobs are important, and I'm not saying they're not, but if the private sector isn't willing to put up the money to do the project, then the private sector project more than likely shouldn't be happening, and we're picking who gets to be a successful business person or not with taxpayer money. I'd rather lower a tax for everyone, like get rid of the business personal property tax, like you pay on this mic and you pay on the chair and you pay all these things you pay. You have to itemize. That's admin, right?
Right.
Plus you got to pay tax on it and they don't depreciate it. So be better off to figure out how to lower that tax and phase it out so that everyone can be more competitive and you can have a lot of more flourishing businesses than pick a few that get to pay for their structured parking with the revenues that their business generates, tax revenues. It's a bad business model, and it hasn't ever moved the needle. And I'll have a good example. In 1986, I sat on the stage at Kingston Elementary School, along with Linwood Branch, Reva McClannon, Barbara Henley, and the whole thing was the city's tax base was 86% residential, 14% non-residential. And our goal was to then get to 70-30, to have more of the tax burden being shared by commercial, industrial kind of properties.
Yeah.
Today, July 1st, tax base on 2024, 85% tax base is residential, 15% is non-residential. So in, 38 years of picking winner and loser strategy and using tax hasn't moved the needle. So I think you could say, I'm not saying that people didn't operate with good intent and motivation, but you can only conclude one thing, that strategy failed. And we need to adopt a new strategy going forward. And the times are even more difficult if you look at the global picture than looking back. So we have some challenges to make, but that's a business model we have to move away from. And that is going to be probably hard to do with the current incumbents.
Gotcha. So, John, just to quickly summarize that, because the question was, what do you feel of the objectives that you're working towards is least obtainable? It sounds like you were talking about the, was that enabling the private sector job growth, just to clarify? Is that the one?
I think we can grow.
It kind of talked about tax relief as well.
I think it really gets to, if we want to grow jobs, we have to move away from this private-public partnership model to get there. And instead, we have to level the playing field and create the same tax incentives that every business gets and let the private capital markets decide who the winners and losers are. So they're really tied together.
I got you. Yeah, absolutely, John. I appreciate you clarifying that. So on the subject of the next subject I'd like to cover, which ties in nicely with this, the subject of investing in neighborhoods, because if you do want more higher paying jobs, you probably have to have affordable housing or housing for people to live and work in that area, right? Remote was a popular trend, it seems, in 2020, and we've kind of, in a lot of ways, somewhat moved away to a a little bit more balanced climate from work from home versus going to the traditional office. Wouldn't you agree?
That's true, and it's really interesting. They had that State of Virginia report. I don't know if you're familiar with that.
Yes, sir.
And they talked about 2 districts in the state where we were losing young population. Were leaving those regions was Northern Virginia, and was Hampton Roads.
Hampton Roads. Yep.
And Northern Virginia people were leaving, but not leaving their jobs. They were taking their jobs and their salaries to a new location because of the high cost of living.
Right.
Right. In Hampton Roads, the conclusion was we're losing the same young people, but not because they were taking their jobs with them, because there were not the jobs that would pay them to live with the cost of living. So they're moving to go to jobs where there's a better alignment between their pay and the cost of living. So then you get back and say, what part of the cost of living does the council control? Well, it's the cost of taxes and fees, because that when we raise our taxes, we raise them 28% over the last 3 years.
Yeah, cost of living here.
Those people pass that cost on directly in the rent, and then your mortgage company quickly sends you that escrow statement. Now, when people say, what can the city do? Because they say that's their number 4 priority. I just heard that last night. The number 4, and I've read it before, but it was restated last night at a location. And I said, well, if that's your highest priority, then how come we're not giving land that we already own, which is a major component in Virginia Beach? There's other capital costs, cost of supplies, but cost of land is a part. Well, and what is the biggest difficult is for what? Single people looking for work, looking for housing.
I love that, John. So with that in mind,
can I give you the example about how
I'm going to ask this real quick because it'll tie in nicely. So I'm curious for you, what's more important for our city right now then, right? Because there is money being spent, according to you, in sectors that don't necessarily need to be there because it doesn't attract the right people to stay or to come. For you, what's more important for our city right now? Building new homes and building new homes and commercial spaces, duplexes, or rehabbing, expanding, and better utilizing our existing homes and storefronts? I think the private market has to answer that question. Okay. Because I think government, we're not a command economy, though we've tried to do one here in Virginia Beach. It doesn't always work out well. Right. But what we can do, and this is, we have an organization that has the very mission you kind of talked about, affordable housing, and that's the Virginia Beach Community Development Corporation. Many people don't know that they already own and operate 435 townhomes and single-family homes that they rent at a reduced rate for which there is no income tax, which there's no property tax on. So that's already a benefit that the taxpayers provide because we have to make up that difference, right? And so that's about $3,000 a home, what more than likely a year of already. And so that's good. So we own property, a great property, the old Circuit City property. The city owns that. Right out by Town Center in Apex area.
There's no big demand right now for B2. I think we all would understand that that's
just for our listeners. Could you clarify what B2 is?
It's business. Let's build more retail space, because there's lots of, when you start seeing lots of churches and retail spaces, the demand for retail space from the commercial side is low. Okay. As a city as a whole. Right. And there's not a big demand for office space either.
Is there though? Is there a demand for office space?
I said there is not a big demand for office lease, and it's just because banks don't want to loan it. They're carrying a lot of negative value property on their stuff now because the marketplace and people have to renew these loans. There is excess office space. Okay, interesting. And you could see it in the market. And the city just bought one that was basically empty, and they probably overpaid for it for the voter registrar over there by Mount Trashmore. And so there is excess, and you don't see anybody building non-city subsidized office space. That's another cue. But we own that property. It's greatly located for what? High-rise, affordable housing for single people, if we look at that model. So we could transfer land, if we say that's a high priority. Yeah. And that marketplace has a lot of those entry-level jobs, right? All around there. Got good transportation, got places for medical, got places to shop, competitively shop. So why aren't we betting on ourselves and say, if we're trying to do workplace development, workforce, there's a great location. so we aren't helping to solve our own problem we say is a priority with resources we already own. So when people tell me they have a problem, and I look at, they say, you have a spending problem or whatever it is, you look at it is, you don't have a shortfall of money, you have a shortfall of prioritization problem. So if we say that's a priority, then why aren't we using resources we already own before we talk about, and you don't give $22 million of borrowing capacity to build luxury apartments at Pembroke Square, which is what we did.
When you use the phrase affordable housing, I'd love for us to define that here because it means a lot of different things to a lot of people depending on their job or if they are dual income or single income. What does affordable housing mean to you?
Affordable housing means affordable to rent.
Is there a number or figure or
I'll come back to that in
range?
just a second.
Okay.
There's three categories of affordability.
Okay, yeah.
Affordable to rent, affordable for a first-time buyer, and equally important, affordable to remain in.
Right.
Because once you have it, can you afford to stay in it? So when someone says that if you use the HUD example, they're saying the upper limit of affordability is that you spend no more than 30% of your income, gross income, on rent or on a house payment. It doesn't mean it doesn't really change. It's just that's not affordability. And so when you look at the average price of rent in Beach, it all depends where you're at. If you want to be on the bayfront, not very affordable. If you want to be over on Military Highway, more affordable. So, and then you got to ask, and then you got to say, what influence does the Navy's housing allowance have on the rental market?
Sure.
Because that kind of sets off, everybody says, hey, I know I can get this.
Yeah. What is your BAH? Right.
Yeah, and it varies, and it's tax-free. So all that has an influence. So when someone says affordable, but then you have to ask yourself is, what is the marketplace building? The free market, right?
Right.
They're building what they can get the biggest return. So all you're seeing is, quote unquote, luxury apartments. So I don't know that the city council, in terms of what they can do, we can't change the cost of capital. We can't change the cost of building materials. So we got to look at how do we preserve what we do have that is affordable, neighborhoods that are affordable to rent in. I think the average 3-bedroom ranch around here is like between $2,200 and $2,500, but there are places where there's townhomes for $1,800. We've got to move up the wages because council biggest thing is what? Property tax and fees, and we can probably lower that cost. Whether that gets passed on to the renters is another story, but you might be able to get that down maybe $50 a month. Does that translate back to them getting that break, or does the person harvest that to keep? So I think I'm pretty more realistic about not making promises that a council can't keep because we don't run the marketplace. But what we can do is make sure that we do more JTS deals and less Amazon deals if we have to make a deal. But how can we lower the cost of doing business in Virginia Beach so that, as you talked about, veterans, people starting businesses, because most jobs are small employers today. So how could, and more gig work or more independent work. And we do have remote workers coming from here, from Northern Virginia, which is driving up in part rent because the demand is being driven by external salaries. They're not being paid by the local market. And we've also got people to say, go back to school and get those better paying jobs that we have at our shipyards and that are dying for skilled workers.
Right.
And they got to scale up their skill set so they can earn a better live. And we got to look at accessory uses that allows us maybe to have people, I wouldn't say in zero lot lines, but in R10, can people build an accessory use and rent that on their property? We got to look at that to increase inventory. But the city council and the state government as well have very few tools to undo the debasement of the currency and high interest rates of the Fed. That is a difficult challenge, which is beyond, I think, the fix power of the city council to fix. But can we do things to mitigate and take the edge off? Yes. To solve that problem on our own? No. The Fed's got to be a lot more responsible, and Congress got a lot more responsible to make people's purchasing power mean something rather than have their, I think the inflation has caused the average family over 11 years to lose $11,000 of purchasing power. No city council is going to fix that.
Hey everyone, Michael here from Behind the Camera. Right now we're taking a quick break to acknowledge and thank our wonderful studio host, Atlantic Bay Mortgage Group. When it comes to getting information and guidance on financing your next home purchase, we recommend talking with Atlantic Bay. They are one of the original lending institutions in our home city of Virginia Beach, and have a long resume of getting the job done well and making your home buying experience more enjoyable. So, if you're looking to experience Virginia full-time, consider checking them out today at www.atlanticbay.com. Disclosure: loan programs may change at any time with or without notice. Information deemed reliable but not guaranteed. All loans subject to income verification, credit approval, and property appraisal. Not a commitment to lend. Atlantic Bay Mortgage Group, LLC, NMLS number 72043, NMLSconsumeraccess.org is an equal housing lender. And now, back to today's show.
All right, everyone, welcome back. This next question, I'm not sure, as we mentioned and alluded to earlier, John, there are some limitations to local government, which exist, for, many different reasons, but a lot of times it, allows for accountability at different levels of government, right? On the subject of the private job sector, I'm curious if you could change one thing in our zoning code, what would it be and why?
One thing in our zoning code, that's a good question.
Shout out to our Facebook group members and everyone I hit up for questions.
If I could change one thing, would be to change how we process variances. That's and probably expand the conditional uses that people could go for on their property, and make it a little bit easier to conduct a business from a home. And I think that varies by what neighborhood. It's easier to do in the neighborhood where there's more on-street parking than other places. I mean, there's obviously zero lot line, high dense, you can barely get the trash cans out, couldn't do. But there's R10, R30, even R40. There might be some cases where that would look at. I think that would be a good example. I think we've probably gone the wrong way on parking on some areas with apartments, but I think I would change maybe the parking requirements maybe on some of our older shopping malls where you can look and see, well, maybe we're not getting the best utilization. But on the top of my head, I'll profess I don't have one, but I would be. This is what part of a mayor's role is listening.
Sure,
if people see something that I don't see, this is how you innovate. By people who say, "Hey, how come we can't do this?"
And I will confess.
And then you say, "Yeah, I could do that." But off the top of my head, I know some people might like to say to allow backyard chickens by right.
Yeah.
Or change something about STRs, short-term rentals. But I think we came to the right compromise on short-term rentals.
Sure.
But nothing right now just stands out and said, "Ooh, this is what I would change."
Absolutely. And as a proud Texas born and raised man myself, I will say, parking in garages is a great luxury we have that unfortunately Hampton Roads feels lacking sometimes. So yeah, I always have to ask that personally.
Well, parking garages, depending on how you build them, it's $30,000 to $40,000 a space. If it's structured, it's probably drop about $10,000 off of that if you do preformed, precast, but they have a height limitation. I mean, it's just a wealth of knowledge that I have because I spent a lot of time studying these issues, and that's why the devil's is always in the details. That's why I try not to get out ahead of the facts.
Of course, not ahead of the facts whatsoever. The numbers never lie, right?
That's right.
So, Virginia Beach residents, although divided on some issues, as we've seen in our Facebook chats and people hit me up in the comment section, people that'll comment on this video, we all want the best version of our city. We truly care about giving each other, our tourists, a great experience. I think we can all agree on that because we're a community of people who really care. Do you agree with that statement?
Yes. Virginia Beach, if you travel around the country, which when I worked for the Navy I had an opportunity to do, is you will be hard-pressed to find a community that has more people volunteering doing more things than Virginia Beach. And nobody values their parks and their recreation centers, and which are all well used by residents more than the residents of Virginia Beach open space, which is why we work so hard against some opposition to preserve Rudy Loop, not to be commercially developed, but the last known open space on the oceanfront to be a park. And the residents wanted what? A passive park, some parking, but a passive park where you have some green space and trees and be using it. Of course, the council wants a $60 million hardscape park that has all sorts of active activities on it, which isn't what the residents wanted. So I think there's a case where whose purpose is being served by Rudy Loop Park? Yeah. Are we really focused on the residents who want a resident park or something that's more focused on them, or just another activity park?
I love that. I love
so
that.
We want, so that's and I think there's a case where I think we could have done both.
Sure.
But the council isn't listening to what the residents want at Rudy Loop. It's what will maybe drive more people to come and stay, which is not a bad thing. But this is the case where I think we could have a win for the residents by having, it wouldn't hurt to have some trees and some park space at Rudy Loop. And we bought, when I was on council, I worked with Linwood Branch and Guy Tower on council to secure the old Richard Maddox product. Took a lot of criticism for buying that Dairy Queen, at that property. To create with the 17th Street, you'd come up 17th Street, which was in the old days of the beach city, was the main commercial corridor at the beach. If people lived back in the days, I remember this kid. And you would be able to see driving up there, the ocean would be visible the whole time. It's the window, the only window we will have. And now some council members want to build what? A hotel and destroy the very purpose for which we bought it. Sometimes we have to think about the equity of the residents. We bought something. We said we were buying it for a good amount of money.
Sure.
And for them, and now because there's a deal comes in, you say, oh, we can make some money. Well, you might be able to make some money, but what did it cost you? What's the goodwill that you expended? What's the breaking of a commitment that you broke a promise?
Yeah.
You got to have the long view. The Rockefellers bought Grand Teton Park. Most people may not know that.
Interesting.
People fought them buying it because why? They wanted to say, you're taking away our ability to develop this area. And they didn't want the government to even accept the donation. This was go back in history. But that's who donated the Grand Tetons National Park was the Rockefellers. So having a law, and who now looks and says, ooh, that was a really bad decision. No one. No one's going to look back and say it was a bad decision to have that open space at 17th Street. They're going to look back and say, we're repeating the 31st Street decision that we made to have that postage stamp versus a Vista because we got a hotel. Okay, it's a fixed cost. It's there. It does a great job. But we don't need to repeat that. We need to keep our promise. There's an example of how you value the residents' view and their expectations of what council should do is keep its promise.
Absolutely, John. And I love that. And because the reason why I love that is because keeping our community members in the conversation, allowing, appropriate times to share is key. So I'm curious for you, if elected, how do you plan to involve residents in the decision-making processes throughout our town and not only preserving the history, but also, continuing to advance, better, higher paying jobs, like you mentioned, and more people being able to live, work, and play throughout Virginia Beach?
I would hope, and this is an idea about how do you change the governance style of the city.
Sure.
I would like to think that each month, because the council members have jobs, that each month we could highlight a different district and that the mayor and that district council member could do a 2-hour, 1-hour podcast, because people don't want to go to information. They want the information to come to them.
Sure.
That is the new model. So let's have that, a show like this, right? And you have someone could be the moderator, and people could call in and could represent and have a discussion so you could hear what people are thinking. And obviously some in-person things are also good. I leave that to the district council members to have their individual town halls.
Of course.
But I don't know how I could do it every week, but maybe once a month, people could, or maybe it could be once a week. I have to look.
Sure. If your calendar's open, you can see what's going on, ask questions from there.
Make yourself available for people to make appointments just to come and talk to you in your office.
Sure.
And be accessible, much like, Congressman Keegan keeps office hours. There was back in the day, can't do it today, but Abraham Lincoln, that White House used to be open. He used to meet with citizens. They used to plead for clemency for their soldier.
Sure.
And often he granted those, right? So I think you just so people, if they see you and have a relationship, then they're more trusting and they can see where you sit. I think sometimes we get so consumed in the act of governance, we forget that governance is based on consent. And if people gaining their consent one day on November 5th, I don't think was the model that the founders thought that would be the only day that people would be consulted would be on November 5th. You've got to have a more, and people are expecting that with technology today, to have a more, maybe it's impersonal, but a more active interaction with the people that not lead them, represent them. Because I think Thomas Jefferson said, to paraphrase, you can't lead where no one's following. And so if you want people to follow, you have to have some kind of relationship, and you have to make that happen. It just doesn't happen because you won on election day. You know, that's just the first day. That's the easiest part. It's like buying a boat. The expensive part is the maintenance afterwards. Well, governance has a maintenance to it, and it's continuing that same relationship you had during a campaign when you're wanting someone to say yes. Well, you want them to continue to do what? Support. And I think one of the things that hurts us nationally is that we haven't had that kind of frank discussion, and there are no simple answers to the tough problems we have.
Never a simple answer.
And there is risk we're going to accept because there's never enough money to fulfill all the requirements. So you're always taking risk. Are we communally deciding the risk we want to take? If we want to reduce public safety risk, we want to do those more patrol zones. Right now, there's like about 4 to every 5 to every precinct. And you want to double those because surveillance time is prevention versus if they're spending most of their time responding to calls, they're probably not doing a lot of surveillance. So if you want to increase your surveillance time, that means more eyes. More eyes means more patrols. Right. Can you do it all at once? No, but can you incrementally over 5 years say we can double the number of patrol zones? We need a new law enforcement academy because we can't.
I have a question for you on that.
Oh, good.
Can we jump into that? So,
absolutely.
You know, you're a father. You have kids. I have a child of my own, and we have the opportunity to foster kids throughout the city. And you know, one of the big things I notice as individuals, despite where we may kind of veer off on different ideas or agendas, we just want the best for the next generation. We want to give everyone the opportunity we got, and maybe then some, right? So we polled our Facebook community group. We have 2 questions from them. These are going to be to wrap up the conversation, heading to our last question. Sound good, John?
Very good.
First one, on the subject of public safety, which comes up for people I talk to moving to the area, the tourists looking to book a hotel, or should they stay in a short-term rental? They have these questions. What does the city plan on regulating and or decreasing violence throughout the city? And I'll just kind of open it up to you on that regard. That was word for word verbatim.
Reducing violence. That has really 3 components in my view, and probably more, but this is the conversation.
Stick to 3, yeah.
One is when violence is committed, do we apprehend the perpetrator of that violence? Does the Commonwealth attorney prosecute those? And do they get, if found guilty, are they incarcerated or are the appropriate probation, whatever take place? So that's the closure rate. So people know, hey, if you do crime in Virginia Beach, you're not going to get away with it. That basically says don't do crime in Virginia Beach because they're very good at, and we have a pretty good rate at closure. Then the other part is how do you prevent the violence from happening? Because people say, ooh, no one ever robbed you with the policeman standing next to you, right? He's like, ooh, apprehend. So you got to say is, if before you ever get there, think about it is you can see you have the appropriate amount of, I'll call it, eyes on target or surveillance.
Right. You had mentioned that surveillance earlier.
And that's it. Yeah. And so you got to have the right presence. That's what we would use in the military, the right presence, to deter crime. Then you have to have that third part is in your community. This is communication. You can never over communicate. And it's also about personal accountability as well.
Right.
Is what is the culture that you have in your community? And it starts everywhere. It's a business, a family, a school, is that violence is just unacceptable. The basic government can't make people moral.
Sure.
It can prosecute you for the things of morality that we say are illegal. But how do you build, and that community thing is also about opportunity. That is another thing that's everyone's responsibility. As you talked about, we have all young people, that people see there's avenues other than criminal activities or things to advance themselves. That is part of it, and that's our responsibility to one another. And that government's never compassionate. I mean, it's incapable. But churches, people, businesses, that's compassion. That's why I do scouting. That's why I'm sure other people do programs at their church or whatever it is.
Right.
That's a community thing. And I think what council then has to recognize continually the people that are doing that well, or look at the programs that the sheriff's doing. You know, people go to prison, go to jail, they made a mistake. He's got programs where they get certified to be a landscaper, to be food. He's using the jobs that get done in the jail by the incarcerated individuals to help them earn a certificate or recognition so that when they leave a job, there is nothing better than a job to raise people's self-respect.
Sure.
And I think that it's no one thing, but we've got to communicate the message and then let the people at schools and all these institutions build on that culture. I think we have a low crime rate here. We have had since the city's inception. I think a lot has to do with it, with our high volume of active duty and retired military and government employees who basically are fairly highly, whether it's city work, highly law-abiding. But being a tourist area, you're going to attract people, but often the people that we're arresting aren't just the tourists. A lot of those people are residents. So we can't say, oh, it's the tourists that are the...
No.
That's an easy answer. You got to look in the mirror and say we're part of the problem, and we got to talk about that. But I do think presence is key, but presence doesn't mean, that you got a cop on every corner. And you got to allow police the discretion to do their job, and they do a fantastic job. I think we all would agree. But more officers are part of that. But a lot of it is, as a community, ourselves holding ourselves personally accountable and spending time with our youth in our community, spending time with your own children. And we can't look to government to make us a good citizen. We have to make ourselves a good citizen by our own behavior and not accepting bad behavior from others. And as individuals, got to call them out. I mean, that's personal accountability is a big thing, and we need to get back to honoring that more.
I love it, John. Thank you for that. And last question from our community poll. This is probably the biggest question we get. It's the most fun to talk about. So I kind of use this as our last community question before we get to our last question here. There's an overarching challenge many of our neighboring cities face on the subject of flooding. As we and many other cities, like ours in the area, have multiple touch points with water, the ocean, the Elizabeth River. I'm curious, what responsibility, if any, do you believe the mayor or local officials have at not only respecting the green spaces while preserving the cities? And I'll preface respecting the green spaces. Shout out to the Elizabeth River Project. We had them on the show talking about what that looks like.
They're doing good work.
Absolutely, doing phenomenal work. So what do you believe the mayor and the local officials have at respecting those spaces while preserving the city and its expansion projects? Because more people means more space for people to live. So how do we tackle that? How do we balance that?
You have to look at the risk. If you say, oh, well, we want growth, but then realize you can't protect the growth that you build. Anyone would only have to go to, and I had a chance to, because of my Navy work, go down to Mississippi not long after Katrina went through. And anyone who's familiar with Interstate 10 goes across Mississippi, Louisiana, and the airport's on the south side of that interstate, and you drive under an underpass, and you drive under an overpass, and you look at the concrete, then there's that metal railing, and then it says Katrina flood level is painted on the top rail of the metal rail on top of the concrete on top of the overpass. And you are 5 miles at least from where the Gulf of Mexico is, and you say, oh, did that area ever going to recover? And so what happens? They built all their new infrastructure, schools and stuff, north of I-10.
Right.
So you have to look and see, why are we increasing risk that we can't protect?
Right.
That to me, that calculus is short term because God bless us. The Lord is, but I was here in 1961.
Sure.
Hurricane, I think it was Donna, when people were 3 feet of water on Virginia Beach Boulevard everywhere, people flooding, people aqueduct on North Beach. So we have to ask ourselves what's the priority, the balance? So do you say, I'm going to expose all these people, they're going to buy this property, and then we can't protect them? So we're increasing liabilities with no plan to mitigate it. That's irresponsible.
Yeah.
I don't care if you say, we can't grow. Well, it's false growth. It's false growth. So you got to really be looking at how you look at that. Maybe some of these places aren't the best place to be growing. And that's not a good answer to some people if that's their property. But I think it's a dynamic conversation. But what people always want to talk about is the near-term gain, but they're not looking at the public liability. And then when the bad event happens, what do people say? Well, how could you let this happen?
Yeah.
How come that past council was irresponsible? Well, and they'd be right, because often people tend to vote on the here and now, that 2-year window or their window. We have to be looking at, does this make sense over the 20-year time frame when the sea level, if they're right or wrong? What is that risk we're taking? So I think that's a dynamic conversation that takes place with every major development. But if you're talking about we're at Pembroke Mall where the density is already there, or Pembroke Square now, and we're going to do something more there, well, the risk hasn't really changed.
Right.
But if you're talking about where we have a lot of south of the Green Line, now we're talking about we are taking risk we don't now have. I'd say that's bad public policy.
Right.
And short-term gain is not worth the long-term liability. It's not in our best interest. So I think, once again, it's like everything else, it's to the situation, and every situation deserves its own decision calculus. And then you got to look at that as a part of the bigger picture and think beyond your own term of office. But is that something you'll be proud to say you passed on to the people who took your place? And if the answer to that is no, you're probably not making the right decision.
Yeah. Yeah. John, what a great way to wrap up this conversation. Our last question here, I like to stick to a continuing theme, so we like to ask our guest, what's a question you'd like to ask the next guest, right? So this is from our past guest episode. Really, introspective, and I think more relevant too, regardless of if elected mayor, if my podcast becomes the number one in Virginia, regardless of all that, if we're heading in the current trajectory of where we're at, where do you see Virginia Beach in the next 50 years?
I hope we are at what I would call high and dry, that we will have made the necessary realignment of priorities, had got the necessary federal and state participation, and we've paid our share, which may be higher taxes at some future date, not near term, I don't believe it's necessary, to secure that Virginia Beach, short of some catastrophic hurricane, that 100-year flood event, that no home would flood in Virginia Beach. The street might flood a little bit, but that no structure would flood. That would be a great goal.
Yeah.
2, that we would have preserved the Green Line even in 2050 or whatever that time is, and that we would have continued to develop our tree canopy by maybe tax incentives for people who live in low-density neighborhoods like 1-acre lots, not to cut down all the trees, and that we would have changed the shift in our policy, and that we would have invested the public infrastructure to grow high-income jobs. And I do believe in the future, because of AI and other things, that more work will be being done remotely. I think the world of work will have changed because of technology, and I'm hoping that we have the leadership and have made the right decisions to leverage that change that is coming, and that we are on the leading edge of paying dividends, and that we'll have more people who want to live in Virginia Beach than Virginia Beach can absorb, which preserves the value of the city. And we will be a diamond, not in just the rough, but a polished diamond in the Commonwealth of Virginia and in the nation.
Lovely sentiment, John. Thank you so much. And of course, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up the episode today. Chesapeake, Norfolk, you're welcome. We'll send everyone your way as we continue to fill up. John, we'd love to roll out the red carpet for you. Where can folks go to learn more about your campaign? This is obviously a bonus episode. We don't normally have guests on the show, but being we have an election season coming up, and we want to continue to foster these types of conversations. We'd love to know where folks can go to learn more about what you have going on over the next couple very busy weeks ahead of you.
You can go to johnmossformayor.com. That's johnmossformayor.com. That's my website. And you can also call me. Texting works better, but you can leave a voicemail message. Excuse me, 757-636-1534. That is 757-636-1534. I try to respond within 72 hours on voicemails, but I'm much better at text because I can do that any hour of the day. Again, johnmossformayor.com. And thank you for having me. This has been a very enjoyable conversation.
Wonderful, John. Thank you. You heard it, guys. Thanks for listening to the Discover Virginia podcast. We hope you've enjoyed this episode. Text John Moss if you got questions. If I wasn't able to cover something you posted in the Facebook group because it was maybe hard to interpret, be sure to text him there. And we'd love to see you on our next episode as we continue on with checking out some other council members here in Virginia Beach, but also talking to our veteran business owners over the next month of November. Thank you, and we'll see you on another episode very soon.